This week's Torah portion begins with the words, "And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years." The commentaries make a strong point of the inner meaning or the deeper meaning of lived. Yaakov lived 17 years in Egypt. Yaakov's life was not an easy one. Right from birth trauma, competing with his twin brother even in the womb. So his life was not easy at all and wouldn't be described as lived. But the last 17 years of his life, which he spent in Egypt, reunited with Yosef, those were years that he lived. So the commentaries say the best years of his life were lived in Egypt. When the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, was a little boy, and his teacher in school said, Yaakov lived his best years in Egypt, he came home and asked his grandfather, who was the first Chabad Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, he asked him, how is it possible? Yaakov was a very spiritual person. Egypt was a very unholy place. How could it be that the best years of his life were spent in Egypt? True, he was reunited with Joseph. That was great. But the verse seems to be indicating that there was something about Egypt that made Yaakov's life so good for those 17 years. His grandfather said to him, do you remember, before Yaakov went down to Egypt, he sent Yehuda. He sent him ahead to open a yeshiva where the teachings of Torah will be studied and the children will be able to meditate on it. So by the time Yaakov came to Egypt, there was a yeshiva, there was learning going on, and the children were meditating on godly concepts. The Rebbe's question is, that doesn't really answer the original question. The question is, why were those the best years? How could they have been the best years? It seems like his grandfather's answer is that if you have a yeshiva, then wherever you are, life can be good. It doesn't explain why they were the best years. Interestingly, there's another commentary that points out that the numerical value of "and he lived," the numerical value of those letters is 34. 34 is 2 times 17. The first 17 years of life with Yosef, before he was sold into slavery at the age of 17, those were good years. And then his last 17 years, when he was reunited with Yosef, those were the second 17 good years. According to this commentary, which set of 17 was better, the first or the second? Obviously, being reunited with Yosef was a great pleasure, a source of satisfaction for Yaakov, not only because he got to see his son, but because he saw something about his son that gave him great pleasure. And that is that in all the years that Yosef lived in Egypt, he remained the same holy individual and even raised children in Egypt by himself, the only Jewish family in the entire country, and his children were righteous. That, of course, gave Yaakov a lot of pleasure. In fact, the Torah actually says, if you remember in the text, the brothers came back from Egypt and said, Od Yosef Chai, Yosef is alive, we found him. And the verse says, Yaakov's heart was beating. He didn't know what to make of this. But then they told him that Yosef was studying Torah and he knew the Torah and he was practicing the Torah. Then the verse says, and Yaakov was consoled, excited. So at first, when he heard that Yosef was alive, his heart was pounding because, yeah, but what kind of a life? He's alive, Yosef. But what kind of life could he possibly have down there in Egypt? It was only when he discovered that Yosef remained a tzaddik in Egypt, then his pleasure was complete. Okay, so what made the 17 years in Egypt the best years? The fact that you could be good, perfect, holy, even in a place of darkness, that's what makes it acceptable. It doesn't make it the best years of your life. Unless there's something about darkness that we're missing. We generally assume that the only silver lining, the only good thing that can be said about darkness is that it makes you appreciate the light. A person who has never experienced darkness doesn't realize that light is something special. Takes it for granted. In fact, with Adam and Eve, we are told that after they ate from the tree of knowledge, which was on Friday, and they volunteered to go down to the world of darkness, it was just before Shabbos, not a good time to relocate. So they spent Shabbos in the Garden of Eden, and it was only after Shabbos that they left the Garden of Eden. Which means that Friday night there was no darkness. In the Garden of Eden there was no darkness. So Adam and Eve, being created Friday afternoon, never experienced darkness until they left the Garden of Eden. And it was frightening. So God showed them how to make fire. And that's why at the end of Shabbos, we kind of take leave of the light of Shabbos by making a Havdalah ceremony, lighting a candle with many wicks, kind of woven together. More than just a candle light, but a flame, because that's the first time fire was enjoyed by a human being. So we can imagine, having experienced darkness for the first time, light was highly appreciated for the first time. Whereas Friday night, when darkness never happened, it was assumed that light is normal. Nothing to get excited about. So generally we think the benefit of darkness is that it makes you appreciate the light. Which is true and it's good. It can't be the whole answer. It can't be that God creates something negative just to help you appreciate the positive. What is it in the darkness that can actually make the light greater? Light is greater because of darkness, or after darkness, than it would be had there not been darkness at all. So let's understand what darkness means. Darkness simply is the inability to see. You have a room full of furniture, but if it's dark in the room, you'll see none of the furniture. You won't see what the walls are made of or how they're decorated. You won't see what is there and what has always been there, because without the light, there's no seeing. So anything that prevents you from seeing could be called darkness. So ignorance, if you're ignorant, if you're not informed, you're in the dark. You were kept in the dark, meaning you were not shown what's going on or what's there, what's happening. So we could say the soul is light, the body is darkness, because the body doesn't understand. The body does not see. The soul does. So what then is the body? Again, the conventional wisdom, the body conceals the light of the soul. And when the soul overcomes that concealment, it is enriched, because now it appreciates what it has. But if you look a little deeper, the body is not just a denial of light or a state of ignorance. There's something about the body that the soul doesn't have. You see, the soul is all about function. The soul has 10 functions, or 12 functions, or 15 functions. When we talk about a soul, we're talking about activity, talents, functions. The soul can do this, and the soul, it has intelligence, it has emotions, it has will, it has speech, it has thought, it has action. All of that comes from the soul. So the soul is one bundle of energy, one collection of great talents and functions. But essentially, what is it? An expression of godliness. When we say a piece of God, the soul is a piece of God. What's a piece of God? It means an expression of God. The godly soul has godly love, godly fear, godly compassion, godly devotion, whereas the human soul has human understanding, human emotion, and so on. So what is a godly soul? A light. The body, on the other hand, has no talents. There's no light. Then what is it? It is the simple fact of truth and reality, without any talents, without any functions, without any embellishments. The body exists because God Himself exists, and God creates the body. Generally speaking, we always talk about how great the soul is and how miserable and low and limited and dark the body is. But that's only in terms of revelation, a function. True, the body has no functions. Then what is it? It is simply God's creation, without embellishment. It's almost like it's a reflection of God Himself. It's not godly. It's Godhood. In other words, the simplicity, the rock bottom simplicity of the body, meaning the darkness, the absence of vision, the absence of light, the absence of knowledge, the absence of function. That's God's creation. if we could reveal that simple, artless truth that a body represents, it would increase the soul's appreciation of God, an appreciation that the soul itself does not have. That's in a more common experience. When you speak to people, to a person, about holiness, about goodness, about godliness, and you see the effect that it has, your godly soul is now educated. Because to the godly soul, darkness is worthless. To the godly soul, everything is about function. And here is a non-functional creation, and look at the way it responds when you illuminate, when you bring in some information. The sincerity, the simplicity, and the intensity of a person's reaction when they discover godliness tells the soul that there is something very powerful about the inanimate, about the simple, the uncluttered, the artless, that is in some way closer to God than a godly soul. I don't know if this is a useful analogy, but we'll end with this. You have a child who is very, very impressed by his father or her father. Greatest, smartest, best, highest. Now, there are people who don't appreciate this child's father. They have no idea. So the child completely rejects those people, cannot communicate with them, can't relate to them, because how can you not see the greatness of my father? But then, one of these people who never appreciated the father's greatness discovers something about the father and in some way appreciates the father and becomes connected to the father more than the child. Now the child has to stop and think, whoa, there's something about my father I never knew. How does he affect those people who are not his children, who didn't grow up with him, who never saw his talents, his wisdom, and yet they have a connection, an inspiration, a response that is in some way deeper than mine? Like a true student can be more devoted to a teacher than the teacher's own children? That's amazing. Where does that come from? It comes from the darkness. Again, darkness meaning artless. No talents, just truth. So, to sum it all up, there is nothing more impressive than a soul, but there's nothing more real than a body. When we can appreciate the value of that truth, of that reality of the body, and when it serves God, which is what happens when you do a mitzvah, the body is serving God. The soul is humbled by that. So it's not just that it helps appreciate the light, it humbles the light. So, really I should go a little deeper because I'm all function, and there's something deeper than that. So that's why sending Yehuda on ahead of him to start a yeshiva, Yaakov guaranteed that the children, meaning those born in Egypt, will be able to meditate on godliness. In their simplicity, in their truest essence, they will identify with God in a way that Yaakov himself had never. So not only can you be a good person even in a bad place, the fact that there is no support, it's a bad place. So you are left in the dark, without talent, without a support system, without an inspirational environment, and yet you find godliness. That is essence to essence. That is the essence of a body which is just an artless, simple creation, finding its connection to God, who is also artless and simple, uncomplicated, the best years of his life. And that's why we, the last generation before Mashiach, on the one hand we can call it the darkest generation, and on the other hand, the generation who will bring Mashiach. Because when godliness comes down to the simple level, to the place of darkness, and yet performs mitzvahs and serves God, that is something the soul envies, and the soul is humbled by it. And that's what gave Yaakov 17 best years of his life.